Morning, Internet. It's a rainy Friday morning here in Northeast Pennsylvania. And since bicycle brakes don't work very well when they're raining, I thought I would go for a walk. So what a better time than to start my Southern Tour debrief. There's a couple of topics I want to talk about, and I'll probably have those on the screen somewhere that you can see them. But the first thing I want to talk about is packing. For this tour in 2023, I tried to get my bag smaller. I tried to pack less stuff, and I was generally successful. I still had some things that I didn't need, which I will eliminate in my next trip. But I was quite happy with what I packed on this particular tour. In 2022, I had a roller bag, the one I check on the airline. I had a roller bag that weighed 23 kilograms. And about midway through that trip, I started to look at some of the things that were actually in that bag and realized that some of them I didn't use. Some of them I hadn't even touched on the trip. So I made a mental note of those things that I didn't use at all and simply didn't pack them on this recent trip. And that cut down on a lot of weight. I had three camera tripods. No, wait, four. I had 4 camera tripods. I'm not even sure what I was thinking when I packed them. One of them is the one that I'm holding right now. This little stick that the GoPro is attached to switches into a tripod. I had 2 small, sort of mini tripods that you could set the camera up on a desk or a table. And then I had 1 full-size tripod. I don't know what I was thinking when I packed that one. But I looked at it, and it was one of those situations where you look at something, should you pack it or not? And I came up with these ridiculous scenarios in my head that, well, if I do this, I'll need a tripod, a full-size tripod. But of course, that never happened. So I had 4 tripods. Now when I travel in 2023, this recent trip, I only had 2. The one in my hand right now that holds the camera, and then a small mini one that I can use on a table. And they're both very light. They're made out of plastic. For 2023, I also developed a strategy of using a smaller bag because I think that if you have a big bag with lots of space, you tend to fill it up. And I'm pretty sure that's what happened in 2022. So in 2023, I bought a smaller bag. I cut down on all the things that I packed, making sure not to take anything that I hadn't used before. And I ended up with a much lighter bag. So in 2022, I had 23 kilos. In 2023, I had 11. And the funny thing is, I think in my next trip, I can cut down even more. I'm hoping to get down to around 10 kilos on my next trip. You might be hearing the roar of the mighty Lackawanna in the background. The other thing that I want to talk about is language. My southern tour, of course, went to South America, and I traveled to Ecuador, Argentina, and Uruguay. The whole trip took about 3.5 months, and my original plan was to learn a little bit of Spanish before I went. But world-class procrastinator that I am, I learned 0 Spanish. But as soon as I got to Ecuador, I wished I did. And it wasn't a matter of not being able to get along without Spanish. You know, the hand signals and broken English can help a lot. You can always get what you need done. But knowing some of the language would have made things a lot more pleasant in terms of me enjoying my trip. One of the reasons I like traveling to Southeast Asia, most notably Malaysia, is that I'm fairly comfortable with the Malaysian language. So even though I might not be fluent in speaking it, I am comfortable in listening to it. When I hear people talking, I know what they're talking about. But if I learned Spanish, my trip to South America would have been much more, shall we say, fulfilling. So I think next time, before I go back there, or anywhere where they speak Spanish, I'm going to try to pick up some of the language. It's not a hard language to learn, it's just a matter of studying it. Using my American Express card to amass all kinds of points. I think I made another video about that. That scheme did not go as planned on this trip. Most of my, in fact, all of my airline travel was paid for with the card. Airbnbs and hotels were all paid for with the card, but I did all that online. Where the plan went awry was actually when I got to the places in South America, Quito, Buenos Aires, and Montevideo. American Express was not accepted as widely as I hoped it would be in those cities. So if I wanted to buy groceries or a coffee or, you know, some food along the street, well, street food is never paid for with a credit card. You always pay cash for that. But using the credit card for food in a restaurant or something like that, in some places it was impossible. In others, it was possible, but it was very difficult. So I didn't really get that many points or use my credit card that much while I was actually on the ground in the cities I visited. If you're traveling to these cities and you have a different credit card, a Visa or a MasterCard, for example, those are widely accepted. But you want to look into how to use them, especially in Argentina, before you go. Argentina's inflation rate is so high that they have two different exchange rates for US dollars. And it affects how credit cards are used. So if you use a credit card in Argentina, you may actually be throwing away some money, because if you pay cash, you'll get a much lower price. But that's outside the scope of this video. There's plenty of YouTube videos about it, though. You can look that up. All right, so let's get to the details that you probably are watching this video for, and that is the travel details. I know when I watch these videos, I'm always vicariously entertained by people that go through airports, bus stations, their video on airplanes, things like that. I left from Wilkes-Barre Scranton Airport in mid-April. I think the date was April 15th. On United Airlines, and I flew through Newark and Houston before arriving in Quito, Ecuador. I left Scranton at about, I think 6:30 in the morning, and I arrived in Quito right around midnight. I had an Airbnb set up for the next day after my arrival, so I made arrangements to stay at a hotel right near the airport in Quito on the first night, and then after that I went to the Airbnb. I'm walking on railroad tracks right now, so I have to watch my step. I stayed in Quito for a month, and then I flew from Quito to Buenos Aires with a stop in Lima, Peru. That took about 8 hours total. The stop was the longest part. The two flights were fairly short. I think it was like an hour and a half between Quito and Lima. and maybe 4 hours between Lima and Buenos Aires. It wasn't that long. That was on LATAM Airlines. And then I stayed there for a month in Buenos Aires. Then I took a ferry between Buenos Aires and Montevideo. I made an entire video about that one. That took about 2.5 hours, I think it was, on a fast ferry named Francisco. And that crosses the Platte River, and in my opinion, part of the Atlantic Ocean. But people I talked to insisted that it just crossed the river. It's a huge river, separating Argentina and Uruguay. Then on the way back, of course, I came back from Montevideo on the same ferry, back to Buenos Aires. And instead of setting up an Airbnb, I was only going to be there for 4 days before I flew back to the United States. So I stayed in a hotel for those 4 days and then boarded a plane. This time Delta Airlines did the honors with a stop in Atlanta and Boston. I didn't go back to Scranton, at least not by air. That was a 10-hour flight from Buenos Aires to Atlanta. And then from Atlanta to Boston, it was about 2.5, maybe, I think it was 2.5 hours. I lose track of how long all these things take. And when I got to Boston, I stayed with my brother and sister-in-law in Provincetown. Took another ferry from Boston to Provincetown. Another video was made about that. And that wrapped up all the traveling details. My flights back were free. I used points. Well, not free. I guess points have some monetary value, but I used points to fly from Buenos Aires to Boston on Delta. So that's one of the reasons I try to get as many points as I can in my everyday activities, because they come in handy for trips. I was also able to use points to pay for the hotel for one night in Boston. I didn't want to, the ferry had left by the time I arrived in Boston, so I had to wait to catch it on the next day. So I got a hotel near the airport, paid for with points. So in effect, my entire trip back from South America to the United States was done on points. There's no cash changed hands. How do you use your phone when you're traveling in a foreign country? This isn't a question anybody actually asked me, but it is one that pops up in a lot of forums that I read based on travel or what are called digital nomads. Certainly by now, most people know that they should turn off data roaming when they leave their home country. If you don't do that, you're going to be shocked by the size of the bill that you receive when you return home. So you won't really have data. So the question then, how do you get data and still keep your home service active and not suffer from ridiculous charges? The downside of turning off data roaming, of course, is that you don't have any data. So you're not going to be getting any emails. You're not going to be able to go on the web searching travel sites or whatever it is you do. And you won't be able to use your phone for navigation because you have no data. There is a solution to this, and it's fairly simple. If you have a phone that was manufactured in the last, I'd say 3, maybe even 4 years, you probably have multiple slots for SIM cards, so you can have more than one SIM card, or your phone has the capability of using what's called eSIMs. These are electronic SIM cards that actually aren't a physical card at all, but simply some code that is loaded onto the phone and acts the exact same way as the SIM card would. I use an iPhone 12 mini, the small one, and I have one physical SIM card slot and space on the memory, or space in the memory, for up to 8 electronic SIM cards, or eSIMs. So what I do is I keep my home service active, I turn off data roaming, and I use an eSIM, because the physical SIM and the eSIM can be active at the same time. I use the eSIM for data. So when I land in a country with an eSIM, and I'm using an eSIM, I can get all the data I want for my daily walks from Google Maps. I can receive all my emails, and I can use the phone with the internet connection from the eSIM card in the same way that I would if I were at home. So eSIMs in conjunction with your home phone physical SIM is the way you solve the problem of how you have your home phone active and how you continue to be able to use data when you're traveling in a foreign country. You're probably wondering why you need to have your home phone active while you're traveling. If you're traveling long term, I'm going to guess that at some point you're going to want to log into your bank account, your credit card account, or some account that requires a password or a login procedure, and you're going to get that dreaded message, "This device is not recognized." So they send you a text message at the phone number they have on the account for you, and they want you to enter that text message so that they can verify that this is you. Dual authentication or two-factor lock-in or whatever they call it. And if your home service is not active, you're never going to receive that text message. So if you have to go into your bank account and set up some bill payments and you don't have your home service active, you can't actually log into your bank account. You can try calling them, of course, and explaining your situation, that you're in Zimbabwe and you're not getting this text message, but banks nowadays are very alert to problems with fraud, and they don't really have a way to tell where you're calling from. So I'm going to tell you, before you waste your time doing something like that, that won't work. You have to be able to get that text message, or you're never going to log in to some of these accounts. Now, some banks have taken the step of using an email address in order to send the login password, but not all of them. Many still rely on a text message, but that's why you need to have your local phone service active while you're traveling. So you need an eSIM. Where do you get one? There are several apps available both in the Apple Store or the App Store and Google Play, where you can buy, or not buy, but download apps where you can buy eSIMs. And the way they work is you just put in the name of the country that you're traveling to. It'll give you a list of available eSIMs. Now, they come in various sizes and shapes, so to speak, in terms of the amount of data that they provide and the amount of time that they're valid. I would suggest that if you've never used an eSIM before, that you start small. So try to pick one that's good for 7 days and has 1 gigabyte of data. In my experience, that's usually the smallest amount of data that you can get and the smallest amount of time. It's also the cheapest eSIM. I've also found that people overestimate the amount of data that they actually need. 1 gigabyte of data may not sound like much, but if you're traveling long term, you're probably staying in a hotel or an Airbnb where you have access to Wi-Fi. So you're not going to be using that much data on your phone anyway. You're going to be using data from your phone when you're out walking, if you need directions, or some other use like that. So you're not going to be using a lot of data anyway on your phone. So start small, don't waste your money, start with a small amount. If you actually do run out of data, you can always top up. Many of these SIM cards have top-up packages that are additional purchases, or if the SIM card does not have top-up capability, you can just delete it and buy another SIM card. The app that I use is called Artlist, but there's a lot of them out there. You can look on YouTube for all these eSIM application reviews. There are some people that actually try out all these applications and make reviews on YouTube. So if you're really interested in doing this and you don't want to use Artlist, which I found perfectly acceptable, then you could go on YouTube and find the one that you think might work best for you. Anybody that watches my videos knows that I think McDonald's probably has the best coffee in the world. Everywhere I go, I tested it, and it has not disappointed me until I got to Argentina. In Ecuador, perfect McDonald's coffee. In Uruguay, perfect McDonald's coffee. In Argentina, however, it tasted like instant with a dash of milk thrown in when I ordered cappuccino. And that's how I test it. You always order a small cappuccino, it should taste the same no matter where you go. In Argentina, it didn't. So I'm gonna have to revise that, and it depends on where you buy your McDonald's coffee. Everywhere I've had it in the United States, it's good. It's been the same, it's been consistent. And you know, when I was in Europe or Malaysia, Southeast Asia, same story. But in Argentina, for some strange reason, it wasn't good at all. So if you go to Argentina, steer yourself away from McDonald's coffee. So that's pretty much it. My review of the Southern Tour, spring and early summer 2023. I hope it provided some information for you to think about before you plan your next trip. Right now, my next trip is going to be the fall tour, where I head back to Southeast Asia, and that trip gets underway in about 2 weeks. I think I mentioned in another video that Malaysian media superstar Grace H.R. Ling is getting married, and I'm looking forward to attending that wedding, along with several other things that are going to happen while I'm there. So until next time, be seeing you.